Well, thanks everyone for coming out this morning. The purpose of today's press conference is to discuss the task force that Chief Mew put together a couple months ago to deal with the pretty dramatic increase in shootings that we saw at the first part of the year in 2015. Clearly, the citizens of Anchorage are concerned when they see a large number of shootings like that, and we obviously share that concern, which is why Chief Mew and the administration were very proactive in trying to find out whether this was just an anomaly, which we believe it is based on the statistics that we've seen over the last number of years, or whether it was something that was more insidious and would require a much more concerted effort on behalf of law enforcement. So Chief Mew put together a team that consists of the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, the U.S. Marshals, the local prosecutors, both federal, state, and local, probation officers, really a whole combination of everyone involved in every aspect of law enforcement to make sure we are dealing with this problem very proactively. Deputy Chief Fanning will share results of what the task force has accomplished here in just a moment. I also want to give a shout out to all the citizens who have been really very proactive as well, calling Crime Stoppers, giving us tips on drug activity, on some of the violent crimes, and so a thank you to the citizens of Anchorage who have been a big part of the results that we've seen so far. I spoke a little bit about the statistics that we've seen over the last number of years that give us confidence that we're on the right direction as far as crime prevention goes. I'll just give you a few of those. 2014, for example, we saw the lowest number of murders in 20 years in Anchorage. That's a great trend. The 5-year crime average through 2013 is lower than the 5-year crime average for the previous 5 years. So from 2009 to 2013, we've seen fewer crimes, which Part 1 crimes, the 7 ones that are measured, which includes murder and aggravated assault and others, those are down compared to the previous 5 years. And that's the kind of trend you want to see. And we always caution folks when they see a spike in one activity or another that it doesn't really mean Anchorage has somehow become more dangerous. We look at trends, and the trend is very good. If you look at the overall trend, it's pretty amazing. There's fewer crimes reported in Anchorage, Alaska now than 30 years ago when we were 120,000 fewer people in this city. That's an amazing statistics. One of the things that we've made a commitment to, as you know, over the last couple years, by the end of 2015, we will have 5 police academies in 3 years, which will allow us to get our police force numbers up to a level where we can really be more proactive with community policing. We're pleased that the Assembly has approved in our budgets the funding for those academies, and so we feel very, very confident. In fact, we'll be graduating academy next week, and so we're going to do everything we can to make sure our staffing numbers are at a level where we feel comfortable. But overall, Anchorage is a safe city. If you look at the trends, look at the statistics, we are considered to be a very safe city, which is one of the reasons that magazines like Forbes and Kiplinger.com have rated Anchorage one of the top 10 cities in America. They look at crime statistics when they make those judgments about where you rank in the stature of cities around the country. So again, we've been very proactive about dealing with what we saw to be a large spate of shootings in January, declined in February, and so far it looks like be on the decline in March. But Deputy Chief Fanning is here. Chief Mew is traveling, and he will give you some of the results of what the task force has accomplished. Deputy Chief?
Thank you, Mayor. I've been with the police department for over 23 years, and as the mayor says, every once in a while you have spikes like this. In November, we had 0 homicides. In December, we had 0 homicides. And all of a sudden, in January, we had 4. So we started developing strategies how to deal with this. We developed the task force that the mayor just talked about. We started taking our data and intel and trying to target certain individuals, the violent criminals out there on our streets that may be responsible for some of these acts. And that's the approach we chose to take. To date, we have arrested 26 people. We have seized 5 vehicles. We have 40 guns seized. We have a substantial amount of meth and heroin that we seized, and a substantial amount of cash that we have also seized. So that's basically the status of that as we stand right now, and we're open to any questions.
Were you able to discover if there was any underlying cause?
On a couple of them, yes. They're all of them involve either alcohol or drugs. All of them are in high-risk top lifestyles that they're involved in. As the mayor said, it was a spike in January. We had 4 homicides. We had 2 in February and 2 in March. So we've had a total of 8 homicides, 7 cases. One of those were double homicide. We have solved all of the cases except for the double.
Can you explain what you mean by high-risk lifestyle?
Well, if you're involved in using drugs, if you're, drinking alcohol to excess, if you're at certain places where you tend to be more apt to be a victim, those type things.
All the seizures you're talking about, are those in relation to the homicides or just kind of in general?
No, some of them related to the homicides, some of them are in general. But we think we have taken a data that we've derived from our CompStat crime analysis. We think we are directing our attention to the right people.
What's changed in Anchorage since that task force was created?
What's changed?
Yeah.
I think we've taken a lot of violent criminals off the street already.
And when Chief mentioned that not all related to the homicides, we're talking about the shootings in general. Not
Right.
all of them resulted in homicides.
That's
of course.
correct.
So there was 30 shootings, and
Right, we had,
not
we-
all were homicides.
Right. We had 33 shots fired type calls in January. So that was, but we only had 18 in February. So I think the task force is having an effect. Yes.
There was a shooting that resulted in a murder last night, one Saturday night, so clearly there's still an issue.
There wasn't a shooting. That was a stabbing this morning.
Oh,
That
stabbing.
resulted in a
Okay, well, there was
homicide.
shooting
Yes.
Saturday night.
A shooting
Obviously-
Saturday night that started at a bar in town. There was a disturbance at a bar. Some shots were fired up in the air. One of the people that was involved in that disturbance wanted to retaliate. He ends up driving around trying to find the other people that were involved in that, ends up shooting some in the air and in the direction of some people that were standing outside, and we believe that the person that got hit in the leg had been at the bar but wasn't necessarily involved in the disturbance earlier. Yes.
Here, we'll
Oh, I'm
spread
sorry.
it. Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
You mentioned the seizures of drugs, 7 cases solved, and to what degree of overlap is there in these? Are these 7 totally independent instances? Is it crime that goes back to a certain place, and we're just seeing the?
No, we think 2 of them were related. The rest of them were probably independent of each other.
And if you guys have been able to assemble a task force and really put the resources there, that seems like a pretty quick response. I'm curious what degree of proactivity you're building in for addressing this going down, and why wasn't that in place, 3 months ago?
Well, it probably was somewhat in place. The people who are doing this job primarily in APD are the CAP, the VICE, and the SAU Special Assignment Unit. So they kind of do these type things anyway. VICE does long-term drug investigations. Special Assignment Unit does high-risk felony type stuff. So they do it. Or the chief joined all of those together to be able to throw it all at once at them. So I think that's why it's been effective.
You mentioned 26 people. To what extent were these people involved in the crimes from your guys' perspective? Were these people driving cars? Were they people who actually fired weapons? Can you talk about
I think all of the above. Some of them were driving cars. Some of them were firing weapons. Of that were the arrest. We were able to solve 2 of the homicides with the task force and the homicide within a week. So I think it's all of the above.
When the task, you were next in line.
No, that's okay. I was just going to ask, can you explain how the task force works on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, right now we have 15 officers with APD. Like I said, they come from CAP, VICE, and my Special Assignment Unit. We have 2 supervisors overseeing their activity and 1 lieutenant and a captain. They all report directly to me. We also have incorporated all the other agencies that the mayor mentioned, the federal and state agencies. They work with us on a case-by-case basis. They're all feeding us intel, we're feeding them intel, but they're all involved in this. They have all done magnificent work for us and been able to, let us solve some of these crimes. So we work. Sometimes we flex the special assignment unit if it's somebody very violent that we're going after. Other times we usually are out there, from 10 o'clock in the morning to 1 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes it extends past that.
Back over here.
As the task force was getting started, the chief at the time speculated that the marijuana legalization might have been a factor with the market jockeying for position. Has that panned out?
I don't want to speculate on that until we have, until we've concluded all these investigations. I hate to speculate on it at this point. Yes.
Mayor Dinn, you kind of brought out that this is a lower crime instance than 20 years ago, and I'm just curious if that's per capita or overall reported crime.
Overall reported crime. You'd think being a 100,000 person greater city, you'd have a proportionate amount of greater crimes reported, and it's actually over 30 years ago. So early 1980s, again, 120,000 less people in town, more crime reported. And of course, it's so much easier to report crime now. In fact, people don't report it, they video it on every phone held by everybody around a crime. So it's a good statistic. I mean, it really does show that Anchorage is a safer city than we were over the last several decades. And that's the trend that we've seen over the last number of years as well, which is why when we saw this spike, we wanted to make sure through the task force that this was not something insidious or a huge gang-related problem, and so far it doesn't look like that's the case.
And
yes, Devin. I'm sorry. Oh, follow. Go ahead, Zach.
Well, this is for either one of you, but with staff levels the way they are, what are we looking at in terms of overtime to make this task force come together and get results? I mean, do you guys have projections on what the cost overages are in overtime?
I can talk to that.
Sure.
Yeah, there's been very little overtime generated so far. Like I said, we do have the ability somewhat to flex our special assignment unit. So I don't have the total numbers on it, but it's very little overtime that's been expended while we're dealing with this issue.
Yeah, kind of two things. One, kind of piggybacking off of that. As far as the number of investigators, detectives that are on the case, I mean, how have those numbers changed in the last 5 years as far as the number of people in our detective units that are able to respond on investigations?
Our detective units are a little smaller than they were historically, but we're starting to build back up now. As more and more of these academy recruits get cut loose, then we'll start filling up what we think, what positions they need to go into.
And my other question was for historical stats. 30 years ago, what were the metrics though that were being used to measure crime in Anchorage? I mean, like, how was it being calculated, like the crime stats compared to today? I don't know if you guys know about that. I just was curious. I'm assuming it was different.
Yeah, I don't think it's changed. Part 1 crimes are Part 1 crimes.
Right.
They've been reported statistically and historically similar, particularly, if you go back maybe 50, 60 years, you might see something different. But in our little modern era, I think crime reporting's been pretty consistent. And then back to your point about detectives, when we did the Police Executive Research Forum report back when this administration started, one of the things they said was that our detective force actually probably was too large because they were not carrying the same load capacity that a typical department might carry. So that's one area where we actually were able to constrict a little bit without affecting their ability to handle a certain caseload, and that was the recommendation of the PERF report. So, but again, as the city grows, we've made a commitment that we want to be more proactive with community policing. That does take human resource to do it, and that's why, again, within a 3-year period, we'll have 5 academies. We'll be more than able to make up for attrition and grow the department.
You said a substantial amount of heroin, meth, and cash was seized. Can you be more specific?
Yeah, I had 284.95 grams of meth so far, 42.47 grams of heroin, and then we have some other drugs as well. We have some marijuana edibles, morphine, etc.
Is that so far this year since the task force was started?
That's just the task force numbers.
Okay.
What's the plan going forward for the task force?
We will keep them intact as long as we think we deem necessary. Once we see that we're comfortable with the numbers where they're at and we don't no longer have a spike, then we'll probably disband the task force. But we'll continue those relationships that we have developed with all these other agencies.
It sounds like you guys you've decided this is a spike based on the numbers.
Yes.
I'm still a little bit unclear then how you account for it, how you explain the spike itself. I mean, is it just that there's a cluster of extra violent drug deals, or what's going on?
I don't know the answer to that, and like I said, before, over my 23 years, I've seen this. I don't know what causes it. I mean, we're looking at all of our data right now to try to determine that answer. But occasionally you'll have a spike, and sometimes we're able to identify the reason, sometimes not. I mean, are all of the, I mean, like I said, they're all high-risk type lifestyles that they're involved in. They all are associated with drugs or alcohol. But, I don't know why last January we had 2 and this January we had 4. I don't know the answer to that. It just happens sometimes like that. And we do everything we can to get a handle on it and not let it spin out of control.
This is, I mean, we've seen kind of the Department of Law send out press releases on some indictments involving meth and a lot of stuff out of state from Seattle and elsewhere. And I'm curious if the arrests you've made, if you can say, and if you know whether they're specific, kind of criminal enterprises within Alaska, or if they stretch out, and if we're just kind of catching the local side of it.
I don't think I don't know for 100% certainty. I don't know the answer to that. I have my thoughts, but I probably don't want to answer that until I verify it.
Well, then can I just follow up and say, how many open investigations do you guys have related to these shooting incidents?
We only have 1 homicide open. That was the double, so we have 2 victims, but all the other homicides have been closed. And like I said, after the formation of the task force, the homicide guys did a tremendous job. Our crime scene team did a tremendous job. And the task force did a tremendous job. We were able to close 2 of those that happened in January within a week after formation of the task force. So I thought that was pretty good.
So the homicide this morning isn't tied to the task force?
No. These were roommates.
Yeah, it's kind of a typical example. We've got 2 folks, roommates, getting impaired. They get in an argument, and so that's one of those ones where, people talk about additional police staffing. You would have had to have a police officer sharing the apartment with them to basically have any effect on that. And
right.
And that's really typical of a lot of the homicides that we see. It's 2 people getting impaired and getting into an argument and resorting to violence. And so unfortunately, those are the kind that we can't prevent, but we can certainly solve them.
Can you explain how the units involved in this task force, they work kind of proactive as well?
Yes.
How do they still manage their everyday cases?
Like I said, 2 of the units work drugs and violent criminals to begin with. So they've just, their line of work really hasn't changed much. Now my CAP team normally deals with more of the AMC 880 type problems, excessive calls for service, and homeless folks, illegal camping. They, so they're doing something a little bit different, although they're very good at this too. They have done a lot of drug investigations in most of their careers. So, we're still being able to do it. I mean, they're still doing what they should be doing, probably at a lesser extent, but just like last week, we went down, the CAP team was instrumental in helping clean up Brother Francis down there with all the illegal camping. So we moved all of that out. We cleaned up all that stuff with street maintenance and public works. They're working with the property owners there on the private property side to make sure that they still have that location trespass. We're removing them, arresting them if need be. And we're also working with Catholic Social Services on those issues to try to, Catholic Social Service and Beans, to try to put some of these on a no-serve list if they keep violating the law, because we can arrest them, but they normally come back. So we have to look at long-term solutions for that.
Would you say they're doing less of that, though? They're
Maybe just a little bit on the CAP end, but patrol officers can pick that up, and that's what we're doing. So I don't think we've dropped off in that area because other people are picking up that task for CAP when they're actively involved in the task force operations. Okay.
So community policing is a long-term goal for you guys.
Please speak up, Dylan.
Sorry, community policing, long-term goal for you guys?
Yes.
So does this, does things like this, spikes like this in any way change how you guys are going about community policing or make you think, we could have maybe prevented some of these things from happening?
Yeah. Like the mayor said, some of these are not predictable. The ones that we think that we can help prevent are the violent criminals who show us a pattern or some kind of criminal behavior. And like I said, we use that problem analysis, that crime-driven data to develop plans to go after them. But some of these they're not preventable. The one this morning, like the mayor said, they're roommates, they have some alcohol, they get intoxicated, and bad things happen. The one out in Eagle River last week, I don't see how that was preventable. So a lot of these are not. The ones that are preventable, we have a plan, and we're attacking it.
Yeah. One thing about community policing too, one of the goals is that, as you build up the force and can truly implement where, the same officers are working the same beat consistently and they get to know the neighborhood, they get to know the people. The information coming from the neighborhood is what's really invaluable with community policing, because there's that trust relationship that's built up between the officers and the area that they're patrolling. And so the information is much more free-flowing and much more valuable. And that's one of the key things of community policing.
That was my question.
Yeah.
In any way, it seems like it's kind of different.
No, I don't think. Like I said, we have officers that usually work the same beat, and they try to develop those relationships. My CAP team, my CAP commander, goes out and he meets with community council. We encourage them to get involved, report any suspicious activity, that kind of stuff. Let us know when there's a problem where we can respond to quickly. So I don't think so. I think we're still moving in that direction, and we're doing a decent job of it.
Last question, anyone?
So you both said you think the task force is helping, that you're making progress, but you also said it would be in place until this spike seems to disappear. So are you saying the spike is persisting at this point?
No, I don't think so. It dropped off. As I said, we had 4 homicides in January. We only had 2 in February, and we had 2 in March. I wanted to keep them together, though, until we solved the double homicide, which they're working hand in hand with my homicide unit. So they'll definitely stay intact until we get answers on that one.
Very good.
So I have one last question.
Okay.
The really last question.
Yeah.
Really last question. Okay, let me think of how to phrase it though. So you guys had a lot of success right off the bat with this task force. Do you see that slowing down at all? Because you kind of
No.
did really good out the gate.
I think it will eventually it'll slow down because we'll arrest all the people who we think are responsible for this crime, or the violent crime spike. So eventually it will slow down. Right now our numbers are staying pretty high.
Yeah, and oftentimes, as the chief will affirm, when you arrest one of the bad actors, you're actually solving several crimes because they seldom commit just one. They're usually a pattern of bad behavior, as the chief mentioned. So you can oftentimes basically solve several crimes with a strategic arrest.
Yes.
Really last questions.
Last question. Okay, this is for you, and it's great to hear that there's 5 academies scheduled for 3 years, but this to me seems like a very reactive kind of approach to handling a spike in crime. And I'm curious to hear from you what you would say to critics who would say, this is directly the result of having 2 years with no academies and then reactively assembling something after the fact when community policing really hasn't panned out because the resources aren't there.
Oh, I would disagree with that. The statistics I quoted to you at the start show that during my administration, the 5-year period, crime is down compared to the previous 5 years when there was a higher number of officers. So it's not a direct correlation between number of officers and how you determine crime trends. It's how you deploy officers, not how many you have. And again, the fact that when we came into office, looking at the PERF report, developing a community policing model with the regular beats and a command sergeant, it's been effective. And again, we don't look at strictly number of officers being the sole determinant. It really is the leadership of the department, how they deploy those officers. And again, statistically, it's clearly been working. So I would disagree with your premise. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.